As I mentioned to my students, I only lack like a giant pile of toilet paper to in my pandemic trifecta here.
All right, so welcome everybody. We'll get started. I just want to say a few words as we get started about how we do things in our webinar. My name is Shannon Spasova. I'm one of the IELTS webinar coordinators. We also have Evan Rubin from San Diego State. I'm from Michigan State, and we also have Adolfo Carrillo Cabello from University of Minnesota. We're the three webinar coordinators. So if you have any questions or problems as we go along, please open the chat and then chat to one of the three of us. This is the IELTS webinar series. We're IELTS, International Association for Language Learning Technology. You can find more information at IELTS.org. And we have a webinar series that's about once a month on topics related to language learning and technology. Anyone's welcome to join in those. Normally, the archives, the recordings of those are member benefit, but the IELTS board has agreed to allow this one to be open, sort of for the benefit of the whole community, since this is something that is concerning a lot of people right now. As we go through the webinar, if you could keep your microphone muted so that we don't have any extraneous background noise. If you kind of hover over your screen, you can see where on the left bottom, there should be a microphone icon. If you have a line through it, that means you're muted. So please do keep your microphone muted so we don't have any extraneous noise. For questions as we go, you can open the chat. So if you hover over and click on chat, then it will open the chat window. As you have questions.
Oh, I turned the speakers on.
Okay, we've got some unmuted people. So mute your microphone. If you have questions, type them in the chat and we will be keeping track of the questions and we will ask the presenters as we go. Thank you so much to the presenters today. Normally I give 6 months to a year of notice before we do a webinar. And these three very generous people, Trish, Marlene, and George, agreed to do this with less than a week's worth of notice. So we really appreciate that you're, and in fact, they brought the idea to us. We appreciate the fact that you're willing to help us start this conversation, even though none of us know all the answers right now for this situation. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today. And I'm going to turn it over to Trish to start.
Well, thank you everyone for being here. And I think that the number of people who are here just demonstrates how many questions we all have about how we're going to manage the transitions that we have or the questions that the university community is asking us, or the K through 12 community as well. I tend to speak from a university perspective because that's where I am, but I know that we're all facing these same and very similar questions. This conversation came out of the fact that last Monday, I was in fact approached by my chair of the department and said, Trish, what is our plan if we have to close the university? He had just received an email message from the dean of the college saying that they needed a plan from us on her desk by Thursday so she could forward it to the provost. And I had already been thinking about this over the weekend previously. So I was quick on the jump with some answers, and I was glad to do that. But as I was driving home, it occurred to me that I cannot be the only person who's having this conversation with their department head or with their dean or with their faculty right now. And for those of you who are in K through 12, I imagine this conversation will extend to parents of students as well in the community. So I wanted to open it up. I called contacted George because I knew he had a lot of experience in teaching how to teach online. As the language lab director at Georgia State University, I know a lot about online instruction and facilitating online instruction. But my area of expertise and the perspective that I'll be bringing to it is from a faculty support side. How do those of us who are in language labs or faculty support positions make sure that our faculty are getting what they need, and make sure that our departments and our institutions are asking the right questions going into these. And every institution is unique. The questions that apply to my institution will not apply to yours necessarily, and the answers will certainly all be different. This is like a first step in what are the questions that we think we should be answering, and how are we at our individual institutions starting to address these questions. Marlene, if you could advance the slide. And Marlene very kindly joined us. She is a real expert in online education. And so I wanted to be sure that she was in as well. There we go. So Shannon's already done an excellent job of how to use the chat and the questions and answers. We will answer some questions as they come up in the slides where it is pertinent to the slide conversation. We will also try to answer them at the end of the conversation during the question and answer session. But of course, we won't have time for all the questions. We all have dozens of questions. We have some prepared questions that we started from, that the three of us brainstormed up, and we'll discuss our approach. And then we will move on to open questions from the community. And so, as I mentioned, I'm Trish Nolde at Georgia State University. And George Detiveaux is here, and Marlene Johnshoy. So, is there anything that George and Marlene would like to add in?
I'm good. I'm ready to go.
Let's do it. All right. So when I broke down how we were going to think about it, I always start from a process of what are the questions and what areas do the questions fall into. And so for me, my thoughts were courses, learners, and instructors. And I noticed that somebody added in, probably George, course continuity, and that's a really good addition there. So we're going to break up our conversation to address these different areas of courses, coursework, learners, and instructors, and then also follow up with resources at the end. So the first question that I had for my department was, we're thinking about pandemic and the university shutting down, but let's think first about our attendance policies, because every class has its own attendance policy here. It's not even department wide. And I said the first thing we should do, I think, is to talk to the faculty and say, maybe it's time to relax that attendance policy of, if you don't feel well, you still need to come to school, because if you miss 2 classes, then your grade's going to be lowered. That's not the message we want to be sending to students in times of pandemic. And so I felt like that was probably the first step, was say, if you're sick, stay home. Anybody have anything to add to that?
I think flexibility is important in all aspects of what we're going through right now. So not just flexibility with attendance, so maybe move that somehow to completion grades, participation points. Just depends on the nature of your course. Flexibility with your assessments as well. Hopefully we'll talk about that. I think it's like a next question down, or 2 questions down. So yeah, just a general attitude of flexibility and rolling with the punches. We have no idea where this is going to go, and that's okay.
And with regards to flexibility, one of the things that we have to be prepared for are our students saying that the technology equivalent of the dog ate my homework is I couldn't log in, or I was having technology issues, which is, I don't mean to make light of that. It may or may not be true, but we're going to see a lot more of that in an online remote teaching situation.
Especially when we haven't had the time to really train and prepare.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Can someone tell me what an I-20 is? What do you suggest if attendance is tied to
It's
I-20s?
an immigration document.
It's an immigration. It's the status of a foreign student.
Well, then do we need to, I don't know the legalities around that if somebody else does.
I think that's one of the reasons why many institutions are referring to what's happening right now or what's about to happen probably at your institution as remote instruction instead of online teaching. I think it's probably legal issues like that to package the instruction in such a way that you're legally covered.
And could it be a matter of having a remote meeting with the student and consider that to be in attendance, or?
Yes, that's right. Because I think for many people anyway, what we're really talking about, I would imagine, is synchronous instruction using a tool similar to what we're using right now.
Mm-hmm. So the other thing that the question I came up with was I have 87 faculty members in my department, and it doesn't make sense for each of those 87 people to be creating the same content over and over again. And so one of the questions I posed to my department was, can information that's created by one instructor be easily shared with instructors of other sections of the same course? In other words, is there a repository? Do we have a way in a repository for sharing these resources, or can people share across? We use a version of we've renamed our CMS, our course management system, to iCollege, but it's I want to say it's Canvas, but I could be wrong.
Canvas.
Mm-hmm. And so can we share pieces that we've created across those courses, or make them in a departmental depository that then people can sign into and add them into their iCollege courses?
Yeah, we're having that same kind of discussion on our campus as well. So maybe it's time to learn all the tips and tricks about Office 365 and use all the collaborative features of whatever your option is at your institution. It's funny that at the moment we're about to all go into silos, we need to break down some silos to communicate with one another and share with one another, right? So yeah, I think it's very important that departments come together in groups to share resources with one another. You're going to be otherwise reinventing the wheel a lot.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So ask, what resources are there available at your institution? What technology tools do you have? Are you a Google campus? Are you an Office campus? And take advantage of those things to where everybody has access to the stuff that's useful at a moment like this.
Mm-hmm. And some people are going to be more adept at creating content than others, and so that people are going to find their own strengths in this situation, and recognizing those strengths and sharing those strengths across the department and the community might be really valuable. I think a wonderful conversation came up earlier. Marlene was talking about team teaching.
Yeah, I had the idea that, if you've got teachers who are teaching the same section of something, to get together and, again, playing up to those strengths that someone might have that someone doesn't. But we were also talking about if you're doing something like this that's live with a Zoom or a Skype or something, it's really helpful to have two people at a time so that one person can work with the content and keep things going, and the other person is pushing the buttons in the background, watching the chat box like we're doing here. That's super helpful.
Mm-hmm. So these teams could be created by not only people who are currently teaching the same classes, but if you have somebody who has previously taught a section, maybe you can ask them to be a team and a background person on your section, and then you could volunteer to work with them as a background person on their section.
Mm-hmm. there's a lot of extra work here that people are being called upon to do, right? And nobody's pretending that it's not. So take advantage of whatever opportunities there might be on your campus. Maybe there's already some kind of funding opportunity in your faculty development office for faculty to come together and work in like teaching circles, teaching squares, whatever shape you call it at your campus, to explore a topic together and produce artifacts. Why not redirect those funds for something like this to work together to create teaching materials in light of what's going on?
If you can help share the creation, I've got this article, it's about the K-12 schools over in Asia. And they were saying, because they got dumped into this super fast too, right? That some of the teachers were saying that the first couple of weeks they were working 18-hour days because they were training, setting it up, and figuring it out all at the same time. So it's not going to be an easy startup when you're dumped into this fast.
And I noticed there was a question in the chat group that says, how is this not doubling instructors' workload? Well, this whole thing is actually going to triple and quadruple instructors' workload. If you haven't already created content, you're going to be a content creating fiend as we go through this process. It's going to create workload on everybody.
Yep. So if you can partner up, hopefully that will help.
At the same time, I think it's also important to be realistic and consider what is the easiest path out of this, right? So if, for example, using a web conferencing tool like this and just using your same course materials that you already use for the in-person instances of your course, if that's good enough, just keep doing that by all means. You know, you don't need to create an entire online learning environment because of this. Especially if it's that much work for you.
And George, I think you were going to talk about the next couple of questions.
Alternative assignment submission methods. Those things are probably going to change, right? So there are probably a lot of faculty already using your learning management system to collect assignments from your students. Thank goodness. So if you're not, turn to your neighbor and ask, how are you doing that? How do you collect these things? And they can show you rather quickly. But it may also be time in the case of high stakes assignments and high stakes assessments to maybe reevaluate what it is you want them to do. So you might want to turn to more project-based assignments, for example, things that people can do mostly on their own as individuals, right? So go back and look at the passport, the can-do levels from the Council of Europe, right? So I'm thinking of that language passport. Go back and look at that and see what you can fill in and keep that at the bare minimum for those of you teaching beginning and intermediate language courses. So more project-based assignments, maybe, if that fits, if that meets your needs. People already are probably building portfolios in other courses, so it might be something that comes natural to them to add to their portfolio.
Yep. And I'm watching in the chat here, people are commenting that Zoom's going to crash. Fair warning.
Yeah.
They actually checked on it here on campus, and the Zoom people are telling us that they feel like they've got the capacity to deal with all of this. So
yeah.
Fingers crossed.
So far, we're talking about 600,000 students across the United States who are not able to attend face-to-face courses anymore, and that number is just going to grow. So I sure hope Zoom's got the bandwidth for it.
Right.
Speaking of which, before I forget, I just wanted to remember I saw an article online, and I'll post the link to it after this to make sure everybody gets it, that Cisco is offering free 90-day WebEx licenses to everyone because of the coronavirus situation.
Wow.
Yeah. And the other thing I heard was that Google Meet, they've raised their limit. What do they usually do, like 25 or something? They've raised their limit to 250.
Wow, nice.
Until July. So some of the companies are stepping up. Zoom Pro also right now is free for K through 12 people, because the free Zoom only works for 40 minutes normally. But you can get Pro now if you're K-12 for free.
Excellent.
So some things like that are going to help. Some of the, I've got encouraging changes towards a more flipped classroom, and I'm seeing in the chat also about doing more asynchronous stuff. It doesn't have to be all synchronous online same time. So yes, encourage changes towards more of what they can do outside of your LMS or outside of Zoom sessions, and see what else they can do to work on things. There's lots of other tools out there. But again, you don't want to overwhelm people with too many different things all at one time.
Mhm.
And
And
while
I think
was,
that,
go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, go ahead. I think this feeds into the next thing, which is a more flipped lesson format, because we're all concerned about if everybody's logged into WebEx or Zoom at the same time, is it going to crash? We're hearing from WebEx that it's not going to crash. They're ready for this because we're a WebEx institution. But another consideration that I posed to my faculty is I have students who are enrolled on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 9 a.m. in the morning until 10 p.m. at night. They take all their classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and it's just a really long class load. Do we really expect our students to sit in front of a computer and watch talking heads all day long in a WebEx class? Because I would probably shoot myself if I had to do that. And so there are lots of other good reasons to go to a more flipped lesson format.
One rule of thumb that I've got is 10 minutes of content and then 2 minutes of activity, not 10 hours of talking heads. No, 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 no.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think language teachers are probably better poised to incorporate flipped instruction than any other discipline out there, frankly. There's so much that we can do to get the car ready to drive before we meet together to drive the car, right? So I think it lends itself very well to having students, read grammar, practice grammar exercises, study vocabulary, watch videos for comprehension, and then actually speak the language, save that precious Zoom time for driving the car, right? So that's something to think about. So what can you automate in your course? What's worth automating? What's worth not having to sit there in a room full of people you don't need to be there at the same time for? That stuff should go online, right? The things that you really need to be there for all together at the same time, that's what you're doing during those web meetings, if you're going to have web meetings.
And one of the things
we got to talk at the same time, Trish.
I know.
I was just going to say, maybe to kind of finish up this slide, I just wanted to talk a second about state certification and student financial aid. We also got a notification from the U.S. Department of Education that they will be offering some flexibility in financial aid. And so along with them and some of the other official things like that, check on it. Check with your state because they are offering some flexibility. They know they're going to have to.
Mm-hmm.
So Trish, did you want to say anything before I move to the next one?
Just that I was encouraging my faculty to think about using the WebEx as more of a low stakes thing, perhaps even as online office hours and conversations and things like that, but making assessments more tied to asynchronous things, because the students that we have at Georgia State, and this ties in perfectly to the next slide.
It does.
A lot of our students, if they're home, then they have kids, and their kids will also be home, and also the faculty. And so they're not going to have that time to dedicate to sitting in front of a computer and talking all the time and being available for every WebEx. So that is one thing to consider, is that it's not just the students themselves will be home. We'll all be home with our families, with small children and barking dogs. But one thing we are always concerned about here at Georgia State, being a high Pell Grant university, a lot of first generation students, is do our students have access to the basic technology requirements, computers, headphones, and things like that? Many of them do, but it's a very dangerous assumption to assume that everyone does. As I pointed out to one of the faculty members who said, well, all of our students had laptops. And I said, that's a very dangerous assumption to make at a university that also has a food pantry for students. And so we have to think in terms of accommodations. Is there stuff in the language lab that we're willing to check out? Are there other places on campus where students can check out equipment to take it home? Can we show them how to use their smartphone to its fullest potential? Many of them have smartphones, and Canvas, and Detiveaux all say that we can do everything on a smartphone that you can do in a computer, but let's go ahead and take a few minutes and show them that they can, if they have a smartphone, show them how they might be able to use their smartphone as a hot point for logging in temporarily. But let's not assume that they all are able to do that, and be prepared to make accommodations for those students, that they can turn in assignments in different ways, that they can approach their assignments and their evaluations from different perspectives.
And even with those smartphones, like you were saying, I've got a group of 25 English teachers in Pakistan right now that I'm teaching how to teach online. And we found out that one of them was doing everything on his smartphone. And we hadn't heard from him for a couple of weeks, and we found out that he didn't know how to get in to the student mode where he could actually participate. So all he was doing was reading. He couldn't do any responding. And so we had to back up and talk him through some things, and finally got permission from his school to use a computer at his school, but he was trying to do everything on the phone. And I'm sorry, even though Canvas says that it's phone friendly, there's some stuff that just does not work well on the phone. So there is some training involved there as well for how to get around some of those things.
Speaking of phones, and I know this is kind of a basic thing to point out, but now is the time probably to check to make sure you have the correct phone numbers for all of your students. Because they're never right in the roster, are they? So make sure you have up-to-date phone numbers for everybody in the group, and start thinking about how that might be part of your plan. Are you going to use some kind of group me or one of those messaging services to communicate with one another? Because that's kind of a nice little simple solution to get people talking to one another. Back to devices, we've been through this here at UHD. We went through Hurricane Harvey, and we had to close for quite some time, right? So, it just so happens that our IT department re-images and kind of refurbishes a lot of laptops and computers, and normally they sell them to students, but for Harvard we were just giving them out to people. So maybe that might be an option at your institution. Check with your IT department and see what their plan is for recycling technology, or like Trish said, maybe just checking out the technology that's there. You're going to have a lot of labs that are empty, so why not put that technology to use by lending it to somebody?
Mm-hmm. I'm prepping a bank of iPads to loan out to students who can say to me that I don't have any other way. I can't address the fact that they don't have internet at home. I'm hoping that somebody in their family has a smartphone and they can use it as a link. But it's just going to be, there are going to be some that fall through the cracks, unfortunately, and that's the nature of the digital divide in this country still.
Yep. And the usual, is to say, well, go to the library, or I read something this morning about parents who sit outside of McDonald's in their cars so that their kids can do their homework with the McDonald's connection. I mean, it's crazy, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. The other question in the language lab that I have is, we offer tutoring. Tutoring is a really important service to our students. And once we're sending them out to be remotely instructed in their languages, what kind of support are we going to be able to give them, aside from talking to the teacher, the academic support that they need? So we're in the process of converting our face-to-face tutoring to online tutoring. And we use a program called WC Online. It stands for Writing Center Online, that allows us to have video and audio conference and a shared whiteboard, and they can set up appointments with tutors. And it's, the reason we use it is because it has that scheduling and appointment function built into it. So I'm just in the process now of adding all of our face-to-face tutors in there and training the face-to-face tutors on how to use the online tutoring platform.
Mm-hmm. As a reminder, so if you're an instructor, if you can get your hands on a device that has a touchscreen on it, like a Surface Pro or an iPad, like Trish mentioned, if you're going to be the person hosting meetings, Zoom has a whiteboard too, so you can switch to whiteboard. Those of you where writing is really important and you want to keep that in focus, you can toggle over to a whiteboard and write for your students on a touchscreen.
Mm-hmm. Right. So having that online academic support available to them, I feel like lets them know that not only are they now being thrust into this new remote learning situation, but we are still going to be there to support them in the traditional ways that we support them through tutoring.
There may already be at your institution a move in this direction from not just that kind of student support, but from other areas of student support as well. Advising, counseling, the library, disability services. They probably already all have at least ideas about or a beginning online presence to support online students, just because online learning has grown so much already.
And I will jump in and say that WC Online, I'm sure there are other tools out there, but it's less than $800 a year for a license for us to run our tutoring through. So it's not a high dollar item in terms of technology. And if right now your institution is open to the idea of spending money to make sure that there's connectivity and that we have resources, this might be something that you would look at, this or some other tool like it.
And I think there's been some things going on in the chat that are interesting as far as suggesting alternate ways of grouping students to work with them, using programs like Remind, Extempore, and a few others. There's lots of things out there, but for the learners, I think I'm going to finish up here by saying, because I don't know how to answer the one about the grade school students who need parents at home for homework and computer use. I don't have any really good answers for that one. And matter of fact, here in St. Paul, we just had a teacher's strike starting today in the St. Paul schools, and we've got, local churches offering spots for students to come and hang out so that there's parents don't have to stay home. So it gets difficult, but the thing I wanted to finish up with for the learners was maybe set up as soon as you can a good communication network. How are you going to communicate with your students and make sure that they all know and can communicate, and you can work from there?
If I could add also that to your institution may already have some kind of online learning self-assessment tool, or there may already be some kind of orientation that students have to do before they can even access the learning management system. Make sure that's all knocked out now. So make sure people are oriented to using the learning management system and know about all these services and resources ahead of time. Now, same with you. So there may be some kind of on-demand intro to using your LMS. You should be able to go and knock that out now.
Okay, ready for the next one?
Go.
Yeah.
We've been talking a lot about this already, but more.
And to answer this first question about basic technology for instructors if they don't have it at home, one of the things I'm doing here in the lab is I'm making all of our webcams, iPads, and computers, and also we have some USB document cameras. I'm making them available to faculty this week before we go out on spring break. And one of the questions there is, are these up to date? And this is a big question. So we've been here in the lab, we've been turning all of this on, making sure it all works, making sure that there aren't any software updates that need to occur, and being sure that when we hand something to a faculty member, it's in proper working order, so that when they say I'm having a problem with the technology, hopefully it's not the technology. And so if they don't have a computer with or a laptop with a webcam, or their home computer doesn't have a webcam, checking them out a webcam that they can plug in. If they're more comfortable sitting in front of their desktop than working on a little laptop, then making that available to them. CMS is a classroom management system or course management system. Those kinds of resources, it's not enough just to have them, but we're having to make sure that they work. Do they all have power adapters with them before we check them out? Basic stuff like that. And it's time consuming.
Yeah. And I'm also thinking about that, some of us belong to larger universities, but the small schools that maybe don't even have language centers that support them. The teachers are kind of on their own, especially some of the less commonly taught teachers. You don't have that kind of support. So that's the where do you start? That's the bottom basics. And we were joking before we started about back in the day when people used to send paper back and forth through the mail. Well, maybe a step up from that now that we can do is email. And again, I was reading one of these articles over the weekend that was saying over in Asia that the teachers were sending out tons of worksheets by email to the students. So they're getting the content out there, but the superintendent was getting feedback from the parents who were upset about all the worksheets that the students had to do.
And it wasn't just the
Um,
parents, students too. So I don't know if you've seen the meme that's going around. I don't know if it's true. I haven't had time to confirm. But apparently there's an app that students were using in China to access their homework. And they went to the App Store and downvoted it so much that they removed it from the App Store.
So the next question about the lowest point of entry, this is something that we're dealing with, that I'm working with my faculty about, and that is to actually, the lowest point of entry for online instruction or remote instruction is going to be making short videos and posting them on their course management system. Rather than trying to teach them how to be expert online instructors, the first thing I want them to be able to do is to go into, we use Kaltura, but you could use any video capture program, and be able to say, hey, welcome to class this week. This week we're going to really focus on, as you see on our syllabus, on these topics. Some general questions that you might want to consider as we go forward are, what are the themes about this and how is this represented? And I'd like to see you in your discussion groups online really tackle the question of, is there intelligent life in outer space? But just creating that little video to keep that personal connection with the students, introducing the topic, talking about what you expect out of them that week, I think is a pretty solid first entry into, here's the content online, but here's a little video to show you my face so that I'm here. And then having online office hours so that they can talk to their faculty member and ask them questions.
I still think there's going to be a lot of faculty who aren't even going to be able to do that. Just getting into Canvas and doing anything in Canvas, much less recording something and posting it, is going to be a challenge for some. Hopefully not too many, but it's going to be a challenge for some. And that's where I'm going to skip down to the last one, quick and dirty training for instructors here at the U of M over in the Language Center. They're starting to schedule an hour here and there and just inviting people in to come in and have a Zoom experience, and looking at that experiential cycle where you get the experience as a student first and then back off and say, okay, how do we do this? And then giving people practice so they can practice with each other right then during the hour to put a little something up in Zoom and see how it goes. So that's one of the things they're trying here that people were very enthused about because they don't know how to do it. And so that's a good starting point, is to just practice with the teachers.
We have a lot of open labs for that. We're doing that right now. And we have a lot of just-in-time webinars as well. So it's kind of topics kind of boil up to the surface. I and a colleague of mine might just hop online and do a quick session on how to make a video using Zoom, how to create a YouTube channel, things like that. So there hopefully is in your own IT support area, or maybe in your language center or in your faculty development office, something similar going on your campus as well. So our lowest point of entry probably be trying to get people to host a meeting with Zoom, how to figure out how to toggle and share screen and go to the chat and et cetera, just to get that working. I think
breakout
for many
rooms.
people, yeah. I think video and breakout rooms are probably kind of a luxury. And I don't know if we have time to get to hope for everybody to be able to do that right now. I think the quick and dirty training that we're talking about is maybe not just so much the technology stuff, but to kind of pull over a little bit and think about some best practices in course design. We want to make sure that we're making a distinction between what we're doing right now, teaching remotely using technology, for example, versus online teaching, where there's some intentional course design happening before you teach the course. You know, we don't want to just build the airplane while we're flying it, but this is an emergency situation. So, you know, there's some things to think about, you know, to gather your files together. Think about what you're going to use, what you're not going to use. How does that tie to your course outcomes? How are you going to assess that? What kind of pattern are you going to present from chapter to chapter, from module to module? How will you make your course predictable for your students? Where will be the moments of engagement in your class to make sure that there's some engagement and interaction going on? Do we not want to just set it and forget it, right? How will you insert yourself into this course from time to time? So where's the instructor presence? Where's the social presence? Where's the cognitive presence in the course as well? How are you going to curate any videos that you make? How are you going to make sure that it's aligned and streamlined, right? When we go online for the first time, we tend to overstuff the course with too much stuff because you think, oh my God, I'm not going to be there with them, so I have to give them all this busy work to keep them out of trouble, right? So you don't necessarily need all of that. If you're addressing your course outcomes and your lesson objectives, you should be good to go. So those are the kinds of things that we're hoping for in terms of quick and dirty training for instructors here.
And also in terms of quick and dirty training for instructors, our campus is doing walk-in workshops for everybody. Yes, and I was just thinking that same thing, Andrew. But I, as the language lab director, I feel like my responsibility is to my faculty in the language department. And I have said, I just threw up these 2 dates and I said, I'm gonna do 3 workshops for the faculty in the conference room. Bring your laptop, bring your computer. Let's make sure it's working. Let's make sure it's optimized. And by the time you leave, you'll have had some practice with both Kaltura and WebEx. So as the lab director, I felt like that was my responsibility to make sure that my faculty are prepared to support my students in the language department.
We started off this session by greeting one another without touching, with a very respectful and nice tone. And it's important for you, the instructor, to remember that as well. So you have to find moments to relax. This is going to be a stressful thing that you're going through. So manage your time. So when are you going to do all this stuff? Put it out in the calendar. You know, when are you going to find time to give feedback to your students? When are you going to find time to relax? Mark it all down in a calendar, because you can only get so much blood out of a turnip, right? So we have to pick our battles here. Don't overstress yourself with what's going to happen.
Yep, they were saying stress impacts teaching and learning.
Absolutely.
And one of the things that one of the webinar peoples from the Online Learning Consortium suggested was put your oxygen mask on first.
That's right. Absolutely.
Stay calm, stay calm. It's only temporary, but do the best we can with what we've got.
Let that kid suffocate. That's right. Yeah. No, just kidding. Just kidding.
Next.
Yes.
George, I think this was yours.
Oh, nice. Okay. So what can a face-to-face instructor do before your institution implements a closure, right? What can you do right now? We kind of mentioned those kinds of things already. Just to recap, can you go and take some kind of on-demand course about your learning management system? What is your plan? Kind of sketch out some ideas, update those student phone numbers. Are your students ready for this? Is there some kind of student readiness self-assessment that they can do? Is there an orientation to the learning management system? Some places require that the students do that before it will toggle them into being able to access a course, right? So that's kind of important that they take care of that right now. What kind of how-to documentation do you need for you? And what kind of how-to documentation are your students going to need to navigate in this whole new world, right? Schedule whatever meetings you need to schedule. Go ahead and book them ahead of time. Use the little scheduler in your webinar tool to get those links, and make sure you put those links in the calendar in your learning management system. Get them out ahead of time so students know what links to click on when. They have all that ready to go. Find a friend, get a colleague, get somebody who's a seasoned online teacher you can turn to as a shoulder to cry on. What hardware and Wi-Fi access needs do you have? Think about where your flexibility moments are in your course. What videos might you need to create? Or maybe you need to go and look at some on-demand videos, right? So there might be some faculty development that you can take advantage of. There may be somewhere on your campus you can go to have access to, like OLC workshops or QM workshops, things like that. So
back in the day when I was learning how to do HTML, when the web was just turning into the web after it left being Gopher, that tells you
right.
how old I am.
Yes.
One of the
This is
big
even
things,
before the traffic cones, under construction traffic cones, right?
yes,
Yeah.
yes. One of the big things that I found really helpful was ask your students for help. And in a
Nice.
lot of this, making videos, that sort of thing, ask your students for help. They would love to be helpful to the teacher to be able to do some of this stuff. And they know how to do it. A lot of different things.
Yeah, and that's okay. They didn't come to you for your clicking ability, right? You're the content expert. That's why they're there.
Yep.
So yeah, next one is you're teaching a face-to-face course that can no longer meet in person. Where do you begin with continuing the course online? I think going back to gathering your course materials, right? Looking at your course materials, looking at your course outcomes, and kind of moving forward from there. I kind of walked you through all that stuff. I can share a kind of a bullet list of those later on. I think we're thinking about doing a series here. So maybe I can say this a little slower in a series next time. How about that? So anyway, things you shouldn't try to do when moving your face-to-face course online in the middle of the term. Don't try to dump everything you're doing in your face-to-face course into the online environment. That's going to be overkill, and it's going to kill you. So it's just not going to work. You got to find those ways to streamline and pare down the course, right? Again, go back to your course outcomes and objectives. You might have to entertain new ways to address those objectives. That's probably what's going to happen. And some of the common online tools that would be most helpful, we already mentioned a lot of these, right? Your learning management system or course management system, webinar and web conferencing tools like this one, like Zoom, like Google Hangouts, and the one that I mentioned earlier, Cisco WebEx. There's some screen casting tools like Screencast-O-Matic. Maybe your campus has a license for fancy frou-frou versions of that, like Camtasia, right? So look into it and see. There's all these collaborative tools that you can use, like the Google Suite or Office 365, or any others, Marlene or Trish, that you want to mention?
There is actually a number of things that you can add to your Chrome browser. When you were talking about Screencast-O-Matic, there's also a Screencastify, same idea. I use
Oh,
one
yeah.
that's called ScreenFlow for recording and for editing. It's not free, but it's pretty cheap. There's a lot of them out there.
I see a lot of Flipgrid and VoiceThread cheerleaders in the chat room, and I applaud you, yes, because those are awesome tools that you can use asynchronously, right? So they work really, really well for language courses, especially in situations like this.
Yep. You're talking about, I think it was Sarah, you're talking about little bits of video. Flipgrid is now free, and that's a really good one for just recording in response to a teacher prompt, for example, or students can now have little conversations, but asynchronously.
But I think here's something else to consider, and that is, as the university staff member that I am, I might like to play with all of these things, but that doesn't necessarily mean I'm in a position to support them if you run into trouble. So if you choose to use something that's not provided by your school system or by your university, just please understand that you might not be able to get support from the people who are there to support you.
And that's when I welcome you to the world of teaching online, where you become the default IT person for the class, right? So that's just part and parcel of online teaching.
All right. So should we move to
Next one.
Yeah, the questions that were sent in. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know what to say about that. How can we grant credit for students that are studying abroad that must come home early? I don't know. Maybe you want to switch to the project model and have them expand some kind of project or a portfolio. Here at my institution, we do a lot of high impact practices courses and courses that involve a lot of service learning and community engagement. But some of those courses, you don't actually go out into the community to do the thing. You study the issue and propose solutions for the issue. So maybe it's that kind of level that those students might need to work on here. Next, anybody have anything else to say about the first? No? I don't know what to do with that. Sorry. Student engagement online, how to make lessons via Skype more engaging and hands-on rather than just lecturing. It's just what Marlene said. So the whole concept of 10 and 2, right? So if you do lecture a lot in your courses, make sure you stop every once in a while to let people process the information, to let people practice the information as well. So you can do that in the chat window. You can do that with polls. You might want to add a poll to your course also. There are lots of other ways. I'm sure Marlene and Trish have suggestions.
Especially in something like Zoom where you can do breakout rooms. Did you say that?
No, I
Yeah.
didn't mention breakouts. Yeah, so you could do breakout rooms. That's right. Yeah, and then you can turn that into kind of a jigsaw. If you're ready to manage a jigsaw activity, that can be scary enough in a face-to-face environment. It might be too much in an online environment, but go for it by all means. Put people in different breakout rooms, and then have them come back together and report back once they become experts on a particular topic. Right. So yeah, that's pretty cool. Next is we teach a communicative curriculum that does not use a textbook or teach explicit grammar. How could this curriculum be continued on? Well, I think the flipped format would work great there. What do you guys think, Marlene and Trish?
Yeah, that's the same idea where, you're doing the study of whatever. If there's no textbook, there must be some kind of content that's being taught, but then to try and do some of that outside of class so that when you actually come into, if you're doing synchronous sessions, that's where the communication can happen.
Yeah, use that online time not to lecture, but use it for for conversation, communication, sharing.
Yep. Record the lectures.
Yes.
So you can watch them elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Next is how can productive skills heavy ESL classes be most effectively executed in an online classroom situation? Well, I think those asynchronous tools then would come in handy there, right? So where people have to do an extended amount of speaking, they become the presenter, the almost kind of a facilitator of the class. I would let them do that in something like VoiceThread or Flipgrid.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. So the next question I think is something that we touched on a little bit about limited technology and Wi-Fi access for poor students in poor communities. Unfortunately, I think that the example that Marlene gave of parents parking outside
I was going to say that.
McDonald's is just about the best we can do. We can't go out and fix the problems. If anything, a situation like this is going to highlight the digital divide in ways that we hadn't anticipated. But from a technology support standpoint, it's seeing how we can support what tools, what equipment we can loan out to students as needed, or to families or households. If you have 3 or 4 students who are in the same household, maybe they can share a piece of equipment. And then it comes down to curriculum and to the content. The content and the course design is that the instructors will have to take that into consideration and consider alternative assignments, alternative activities, other ways of getting the information to them.
Mm-hmm. Which is related to the next question, secure testing environment, how to encourage administration compensate for extensive additional prep time. We're talking about test proctoring, I assume, or proctoring services in high stakes exams. Maybe those things need to be revisited and reframed, right? So maybe it's time to diversify your gradebook a little bit and not have these high stakes exams. Usually those are a doorway to temptation to cheat. If something weighs so heavily in a course, I'll be tempted to cheat. And in online teaching, we want to create environments where students don't want to cheat to begin with, right? So, but if you have to, check with your institution to see if you have lockdown browser and monitor, which works with the webcam to give assessments. Or maybe your institution might be willing to pay for some third-party proctoring services like ProctorU or something like that.
We have Respondus here at Georgia State as well. And then somebody had a suggestion about using Zoom to watch your class take a test. Do it the reverse way.
Make them sit make them sit away from their computers so that you can
Yeah.
see what they're doing
You could be the.
and
That's,
watch them through Zoom.
that sounds creepy, but it's a whole new world. Okay, all right, that's fine.
But I think George is right. I think maybe it's time to look at our curriculum and go, is that something that needs to be tested or assessed? Let's use the word assess. Do we need to assess this skill in a test?
Sometimes it's important for accreditation issues with specific disciplines and departments that they have proctored testing like that in their midterms and finals. I can't think of any for language classes where that would be relevant, but maybe that's the case. I don't know.
But maybe breaking things down into smaller pieces, looking at things like project-based learning, so that it's not just an exam that the grade's based on.
That's right.
I'm going to say the next one. What's the most reliable user-friendly app or platform for group instruction? The one that you're familiar with.
Yeah. The one that you can get support from your university support team.
That's right. If you use email a lot, you may end up turning this into an email course. You never know, right? We're going to see a million different permutations of instruction after this. Yeah.
Yep. And this last one, how to navigate seamlessly from one breakout room to another. I have one clue for that: practice. Well, actually two, going back to that partner idea. If you've got partner help, somebody else to push the buttons, but basically going seamlessly, practice, practice, practice.
Fake it till you make it.
Yeah. I think, did we want to take other questions at this point, or we've been kind of watching as we go? Shannon, have you got?
Fishing some out. Shannon,
what I was going to suggest is maybe that you could go over the
resources. Okay, sure. Since we've only got a couple minutes left.
In case some people have to leave, and we know we can't do everything in 1 hour, so they have some resources collected. And I also just want to point out the FLT mag, for example, that is the IELTS publication. We have things like tech highlights there that talk about some of these different tools that we've mentioned.
It's on my list down towards the bottom with the journals.
Okay, so maybe just talk a little bit about some of those resources that you have collected.
Okay. A couple of times people have mentioned, look on your campus for what you can find there. There's probably workshops going on. Most campuses now have online information. And there are these are longer term, not when you need this for next week, but there are longer term resources like ACTFL's Distance Learning SIG. Carla, where I am, we teach a Transitioning to Teaching Language online course as a summer institute. Hawaii has online modules that are all linked there. Michigan State has an introduction to online language teaching. Wisconsin has a teaching certificate. It's not specifically for language teachers, but it's a good course. I also have a bibliography online and a couple of DIGO groups going that you're welcome to post information there as we go. And then, of course, journals from some of our IELTS, obviously, and Calico. And then the OLC is the Online Learning Consortium. They have a journal online as well.
OLC, by the way, is one organization that promotes best practices in online teaching and learning, in addition to Quality Matters. They both have recently held webinars about the issue that we're discussing right now, and their recordings are posted at their websites, and they have resource pages as well.
Quality Matters is great if you're getting into online teaching and you want some good instructional design. That's a good start. And then I just threw in a couple of things that have been coming up over the weekend. There's some articles here. There's some group collections of resources from the Online Learning Consortium. Also, I wanted to show you really quickly this Teaching from Home from CLA. We just got this. I think Adolfo sent this out to us. Did you yesterday, this morning? I forget. Anyway, I love this. Teaching from Home. And it's got this little thing that when you click, it's got what to consider, some tips, but this I like. The easy choice, a better choice,
Yeah,
maybe another better choice. And so things for collecting student work, quizzes and exams, group work, and it's linked there so that you can come and see this, if I can get back here, Teaching from Home. So those are just a couple of resources that I collected. And I think on the very last slide, I put a Z link. z.umn.edu/IELT webinar _contingency planning. You can find these slides, and so you can come back and click those links if you want to explore some of those resources.
Because
Yeah, I
you're
just want to mention we will be posting the recording of the webinar. I think it will be on the FLT mag, but just stay tuned. Maybe like the IELT Facebook page so that you can get notifications. We're talking about perhaps making this into a series. As I mentioned, the FLT mag. There are a lot of different places you can find these things out there. Trish mentioned LLTI listserv through IELT, which is also a great thing. Go ahead, Trish.
Yeah, I was just going to say the LLTI listserv is a wonderful resource where people just post the questions that they have and they get the feedback of many people who are on LLTI. I've used it for, gosh, now more than a decade. So yeah, I highly recommend it for just-in-time answers.
And Adolfo
Yeah,
posted the URL, the Z link in there is in the chat, so you've got it.
And feel free to reach out to us as well. You know, I have a 24/7 Peanuts Psychology 5 cents shop running over here. So feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. You want to bounce an idea off of me and you want feedback on it. Happy to help.
If we don't have the answers, we can maybe send you to somebody who does, or
Yep.
try and figure it out. So.
Or just block you on social media. Yeah.
But really, this was just scratching the surface. We're all going to have hundreds of more questions in the weeks that come. But we wanted to start this conversation now with the basics of what we were thinking about here.
Mm-hmm.
I like this in the chat box. Thanks for the great tips. Feeling slightly less panicked.
Yay! We made a dent. All right, awesome.
Just slightly.
I just wanted to make sure to thank so much George, Trish, and Marlene for being willing to, at the last minute, to share your experience. Like we said, please join the LLTI listserv, like the IELT Facebook page, and stay tuned for more things that will be coming up. We're going to be trying to share as much as we can, and we really appreciate you sharing your expertise. We're sorry that we didn't get to all the questions, but I think these things are going to be discussed a lot more in the upcoming days and weeks. We really appreciate your time and your effort in doing this.
And if you come back to the recording, there's a lot of information in the chat box. Take a look at some of those tips too. Thanks everyone else for sharing with us.
Stay safe and healthy, everybody.
Yep. Use your elbows.
Bye. All right.